They laughed when the new black girl walked into the cafeteria like she didn't belong there. At Westbridge High, humiliation was entertainment. Racism was tradition. And rich kids like Ethan Walker thought they could destroy anyone without consequences. So when her lunch tray hit the floor and the entire cafeteria exploded in laughter, they thought they had already won. But exactly 3 minutes later, a military helicopter landed outside the school, and suddenly the people laughing couldn't even look her in the eyes anymore. What started as just bullying turned into a federal nightmare that exposed years of corruption, lies, and secrets powerful families buried for decades. Stay until the end, because this ending will absolutely not go the way you expect. And before we begin, comment below where you're watching this video from. Westbridge High was the kind of school that looked perfect from the outside. Clean hallways, championship banners hanging from polished walls, smiling students printed across brochures promising unity, leadership, and excellence. But by lunchtime, Naomi Carter already understood what kind of place it really was. The cafeteria went strangely quiet the moment she walked in. Not completely silent, just enough for people to stare without pretending they weren't staring. Hundreds of eyes followed her across the room while whispers moved between tables like electricity. New girl, transfer student. Nobody knew anything about her except that she had arrived that morning in a black SUV with tinted windows and had barely spoken a word since first period. Naomi kept walking. Blue shirt, white skirt, backpack hanging over one shoulder, calm expression, no nervous smile, no awkward attempt to fit in. That alone made people uncomfortable. At the center table near the windows sat Ethan Walker. Golden varsity jacket, letter B stitched on the chest, Westbridge royalty, baseball captain, straight teeth, rich parents, untouchable reputation. The kind of boy teachers defended before hearing the full story. Ethan leaned back in his chair while his friends laughed around him. But his eyes stayed locked on Naomi from the second she entered the cafeteria. Most new students tried too hard. They looked scared. They avoided eye contact. Naomi did neither. That irritated him instantly. Across from him, Madison Blake slowly lowered her phone after pretending to text someone. A smirk spread across her face. Well? She muttered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Guest Diversity Week came early. Several students laughed. Naomi continued toward the lunch line as if she hadn't heard anything. Madison raised an eyebrow. Oh. She definitely heard me. One of Ethan's teammates snorted. Maybe she thinks she's special. No, Madison said, grabbing her phone again. I think she thinks she belongs here. She opened Instagram Live. The red recording icon appeared instantly. Hey, guys, Madison said sweetly into the camera. Westbridge has a new student today. Let's see how long she lasts. More laughter erupted around the table. Naomi picked up her tray without reacting. Chicken sandwich, apple slices, water bottle, simple, quiet, controlled. That bothered Ethan more than if she had yelled back. He stood up slowly. The entire atmosphere shifted. People noticed when Ethan Walker moved. Conversations lowered. Phones tilted upward. Everyone expected entertainment. Naomi turned away from the lunch counter and Ethan stepped directly into her path. Wrong section, he said casually. Naomi looked at him. For a brief second, Ethan expected fear. Instead, he saw calculation. I'm looking for an empty seat. She replied calmly. There aren't any. There are several. A few students exchanged nervous looks. Madison grinned behind her camera. Oh, this is getting good. Ethan stepped closer. You should probably learn how things work around here before embarrassing yourself. Naomi adjusted her grip on the tray. Then maybe you should stop talking. The reaction around the cafeteria was immediate. Someone whispered. No way. Another student muttered. She's dead. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Not because of the insult, but because she said it without emotion. Like she genuinely didn't care who he was. That had never happened before. Madison circled closer with her live stream still running. The new girls got attitude. Naomi ignored her and tried to walk past. Ethan moved again, blocking her harder this time. Their shoulders collided. Food shifted across the tray. A carton of milk tipped over the edge, but Naomi caught it before it fell. A few students laughed. Others watched silently, pretending not to notice. Near the cafeteria doors, a teacher glanced toward the confrontation, then quickly looked away. Naomi noticed that too. Of course she did. Westbridge protected its favorites. Ethan smiled faintly. You know what your problem is, Naomi said nothing. You walked in here acting like your equal. Madison zoomed the phone camera closer to Naomi's face. Guys, comment below. Should she sit with us? Or does she need directions back to wherever she came from? More laughter. Naomi finally looked directly into Madison's camera. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Just cold. The live stream comments exploded instantly. She's creepy. Why she's staring like that, bro, this is uncomfortable. Ethan suddenly felt the attention slipping away from him. And he hated it. He grabbed the edge of Naomi's tray. Maybe you didn't hear me. Naomi's eyes lowered briefly to his hand. Then to the large wall clock above the cafeteria entrance. Oniki onye de PM. Tick. 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 You really should let go, she said quietly. Ethan smirked. Or what? For the first time. Naomi looked almost disappointed. Like she had hoped he would make a smarter decision. Instead of answering, she tried to step around him again. That was enough to snap whatever patience Ethan had left. With one sharp motion, he slapped the tray from her hands. The cafeteria exploded with noise. Food crashed across the floor. Water splashed onto Naomi's shoes. The metal tray spun loudly beneath the tables before clattering to a stop. Then came the laughter. Huge. Cruel. Echoing across the entire room. Madison nearly doubled over while still filming. Oh my God, did you guys see that phones came out everywhere? Some students laughed because Ethan was laughing. Others laughed because they were relieved. It wasn't happening to them. And a few stayed completely silent. Naomi stood motionless in the center of the cafeteria, while food spread across the floor around her. Ethan leaned closer. Now you understand where you belong. But Naomi didn't look at the mess. She looked back at the clock. Oniki 11 p.m. Then she slowly raised her eyes toward Ethan again. The laughter around them began fading for reasons nobody could explain. Because, suddenly, Naomi Carter looked terrifyingly calm. You should have stopped 3 minutes ago. For a few seconds after Naomi spoke, nobody moved. The laughter died awkwardly across the cafeteria, fading table by table until only Madison's live stream voice continued echoing through the silence. What is that supposed to mean? She asked, forcing out a laugh while keeping her phone aimed directly at Naomi's face. Guys, I think the new girl's trying to threaten people now. Thousands of viewers were already watching. Comments poured across the screen faster than Madison could read them. Why she's so calm? This is getting weird. Ethan cooked her. No way she said that. Ethan stepped closer, towering over Naomi while pieces of food remained scattered around her shoes. You think this is a movie or something? Naomi didn't answer. That calm expression still hadn't changed. Not angry. Not humiliated. Not even embarrassed. And somehow, that made Ethan feel like he was the one losing control. Around them, Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few had stopped recording entirely. Others kept glancing toward the cafeteria entrance for reasons they couldn't explain. The atmosphere no longer felt entertaining. It felt wrong. Madison sensed it too, which only made her talk louder. Look at her just standing there. She's acting like she's waiting for something. Naomi finally spoke. I am... The comment section exploded again. Ethan scoffed loudly, trying to pull the attention back toward himself. Then maybe while you're waiting, you can clean up your mess. He nudged the overturned tray with his shoe until it scraped loudly across the cafeteria floor. A few of his teammates laughed immediately. Yeah. One of them added, Get on your knees. Near the back tables, a skinny sophomore named Daniel half stood from his chair. Dude. That's enough. Every head turned toward him. Ethan slowly looked over his shoulder. The cafeteria instantly became silent again. Daniel swallowed hard, but forced himself to continue. She didn't do anything. Madison swung the live stream camera toward him. Oh. White knight alert. Laughter returned instantly. Ethan stared at Daniel for another second before speaking quietly enough to sound dangerous. Sit down. Daniel hesitated. One of Ethan's baseball teammates cracked his knuckles. Another student muttered, Don't do it. Man. Daniel slowly sat back down. Nobody looked at him after that. Nobody wanted to become the next target. Near the cafeteria doors, two teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances but still refused to interfere. One of them even pretended to check papers instead of acknowledging what was happening right in front of him. Naomi noticed all of it. The silence, the fear, the way everyone protected power. Tick, tick, tick. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the wall clock again. Oniki ondokus peme. Ethan noticed. What's with the clock, he demanded. You waiting for backup? A few students laughed nervously. Naomi looked back at him. You still have time to walk away. Madison burst out laughing. Oh my God. She actually thinks she's scary. But deep inside, Madison was becoming unsettled too. Because Naomi wasn't bluffing. Most victims cried by now. Or yelled. Or begged people to stop recording. Naomi had done none of those things. Instead, she looked like someone counting down to an event. Only she understood. Upstairs. Inside the school's security office, Officer Raymond Torres stared at the cafeteria camera feed with growing panic. Sweat formed across his forehead as he rewound the footage again. Naomi entering the cafeteria. Ethan blocking her path. Madison live streaming. The tray hitting the floor. Torres grabbed the desk phone immediately. No. No. No, he muttered. Across campus. Inside the principal's office. Howard Reed was halfway through signing athletic paperwork when his phone rang. He answered impatiently. What, sir? Torres whispered urgently. You need to come to the cafeteria right now. Reed frowned. Why? There are federal vehicles approaching the school. The principal froze. What did you say? Torres switched security cameras with shaking hands. The front gate feed appeared on screen. Black SUVs. Multiple. Moving fast. Reed stood up so suddenly his chair rolled backward into the bookshelf. That's impossible. Then another sound reached the office windows. Deep. Heavy. Rotating blades. A helicopter. Back inside the cafeteria. Ethan grabbed Naomi's backpack strap before she could move away. Pick it up. Naomi looked at his hand calmly. No. The word was quiet. Simple. But something about it made Ethan irrationally angry. He shoved the backpack back toward her chest. You don't say no to me in this school. Madison zoomed in closer with her phone. This is insane. She still thinks she's in control. Naomi slowly turned her head toward the cafeteria windows. The sound outside was getting louder now. Students began murmuring nervously. "Do you guys hear that? Is that a helicopter?" "No way." The entire building vibrated slightly. For the first time since this started, Ethan looked distracted. The noise grew deafening. Whoop! 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 The cafeteria doors suddenly burst open as Principal Reed rushed inside. Visibly pale and breathing hard, everyone stared at him. Teachers immediately straightened. Students lowered their phones. Reed scanned the cafeteria frantically until his eyes landed on Naomi, and for one horrifying second, he looked afraid of her. Ethan noticed instantly. Principal Reed Madison said with a confused laugh, "What's going on?" But Reed ignored her completely. Outside, shadows swept across the cafeteria windows as the helicopter descended lower over campus. Students rushed toward the glass. "Oh my God. No freaking way. Is that military?" The laughter was completely gone now. Fear had replaced it. Naomi finally bent down not to pick up the food, but to calmly lift the fallen water bottle from the floor. Then she looked directly at Ethan. "You should have listened." Before Ethan could answer student in the cafeteria turned toward the front entrance as a convoy of black military SUVs rolled onto school property behind the landing helicopter. And suddenly, nobody at Westbridge High was smiling anymore. The helicopter descended so low over Westbridge High that the cafeteria windows trembled violently in their frames. Dust spiraled across the football field outside, while students rushed toward every visible window, pressing against the glass with stunned expressions. The sound of the rotor blades swallowed the entire campus, drowning out conversations, laughter, even the distant whistles from gym class. For the first time in years, Westbridge High no longer felt untouchable. It felt exposed. Inside the cafeteria, nobody was looking at Naomi anymore. They were staring outside. 3 black military SUVs rolled through the front gates behind the helicopter with dark-tinted windows and government plates. Teachers stood frozen in the hallways, while students flooded out of classrooms despite repeated orders to stay inside. Madison Blake, however, looked thrilled. "Oh my God," she whispered excitedly into her live stream camera. "This is insane. Guys, we literally have military vehicles at school right now." The viewer count exploded. 20,000. 30,000. Comments flew nonstop. "This is real. Someone screen record this. What did the new girl do? Bro, is this?" Arrayed Madison spun the camera dramatically toward the cafeteria windows. Westbridge is officially trending. But unlike Madison, Ethan Walker no longer looked amused. Something cold had settled deep in his stomach, because Principal Reed wasn't acting angry. He was acting terrified. The principal stood near the cafeteria entrance, pale-faced and sweating through his collar while repeatedly checking his phone. 2 teachers approached him nervously, but Reed brushed them aside without answering. Outside, the helicopter finally touched down on the athletic field. The rotor blades continued spinning violently as several armed officers stepped out first. Scanning the campus with disciplined precision, students began recording from every angle possible. Then the rear helicopter door opened again, and suddenly, even the officers seemed to straighten. A tall man stepped onto the field wearing a dark naval uniform decorated with rows of ribbons and insignias. Most students didn't recognize. His presence alone changed the atmosphere instantly. He moved with the kind of calm authority that made people step aside without being asked. Commander Marcus Carter, Naomi's father, though almost nobody knew that yet. Madison zoomed her live stream camera closer through the cafeteria windows. Who even is that guy? But Naomi already knew. Of course she did. She watched silently while Marcus crossed the football field surrounded by federal personnel. His expression never changed once. No panic. No anger. Just focus. That frightened Principal Reed even more. Back inside the cafeteria, Ethan glanced at Naomi again. "Who are those people?" Naomi didn't answer. Ethan's voice hardened. "I'm talking to you." Still, nothing. For the first time since humiliating her, Ethan realized he might not understand the situation anymore. Outside, campus security attempted to stop several federal officers near the entrance. It lasted less than 5 seconds. One agent flashed a badge. The security guards immediately stepped aside. Students flooded social media with clips from every angle possible. Military helicopter at school. Federal agents entering Westbridge. Something big happening. The live stream numbers climbed even higher. Madison could barely contain herself. This is literally the craziest thing that's ever happened here. Then one of the officers entering the building noticed her phone. "Turn that off," he ordered immediately. Madison blinked. "Excuse me, all recording devices are to be shut down immediately." Instead of complying, Madison actually smiled. "Sir, this already has 50,000 viewers." The officer stepped closer. "I'm not asking again." For the first time all afternoon, Madison looked uncertain. But the damage was already done. The live stream clips had spread across TikTok, Instagram, and X faster than anyone could stop them. Westbridge High was no longer dealing with cafeteria gossip. The entire country was beginning to watch. Inside the hallway leading toward the cafeteria, Commander Marcus Carter finally entered the building. The effect was immediate. Teachers lowered their voices. Students moved out of his path instinctively. Even Principal Reed seemed unable to breathe correctly. "Commander Carter," Reed said quickly, forcing a nervous smile as he approached. "I assure you." Whatever misunderstanding occurred, Marcus walked past him without even looking in his direction. That terrified Reed more than shouting would have. Inside the cafeteria, conversations died. The second Marcus entered. Every student turned. The room became deathly silent. Naomi finally lifted her eyes fully toward her father. But even then, her expression barely changed. No dramatic reunion. No tears. No emotional reaction at all. That alone confused Ethan. Marcus stopped several feet away from the spilled food still scattered across the cafeteria floor. His eyes moved slowly across the scene. The tray. The milk. The phones. The terrified teachers. Then, finally, Ethan. Madison lowered her live stream camera slightly. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe. Principal Reed hurried into the cafeteria behind Marcus. "Commander, please. These are just children. I'm sure we can handle this internally." Internally, Marcus repeated quietly. The principal immediately stopped talking. Marcus stepped closer to the mess on the floor. Then his eyes shifted toward Naomi's stained shoes. Something dangerous flickered behind his calm expression for the first time. Ethan instinctively took half a step backward. Marcus noticed. So did everyone else? The commander's voice remained low, controlled, which somehow made it worse. "Who touched my daughter?" No one answered. Not Ethan. Not Madison. Not the teachers. The silence became unbearable almost instantly. Madison looked around nervously as if expecting someone else to speak first. Even her live stream viewers had stopped joking in the comments. Ethan tried forcing confidence back into his voice. "Look, man, this whole thing's being blown out of proportion." Marcus turned toward him fully. Ethan stopped talking immediately, because suddenly it felt like the entire room temperature had dropped. Marcus didn't look like an angry parent. He looked like a man trained to destroy threats. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker genuinely felt fear. Then the cafeteria doors opened again. Two men in dark suits entered beside several federal officers. Simple suis. Small badges. Cold expressions. Every adult in the room recognized them instantly. FB. And Principal Reed nearly collapsed when he saw them walking directly toward the cafeteria floor. The moment the FBI agents entered the cafeteria, the illusion of control at Westbridge High shattered completely. Students backed away from the center of the room as if the agents carried something contagious. Phones slowly lowered. Whispering replaced laughter. Even Ethan Walker's friends no longer stood confidently behind him. The energy that had ruled the cafeteria minutes earlier was gone. Swallowed by a fear nobody fully understood yet. One of the agents, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a navy suit, stepped forward while another began speaking quietly into an earpiece. Everyone stays where they are. The older agent announced calmly, "Nobody leaves the cafeteria." The sentence hit the room like a gunshot. Principal Howard Reed immediately forced himself forward with a nervous smile that fooled absolutely no one. "Agents. Surely, this level of response isn't necessary. These students are already frightened enough. Good." The second agent interrupted coldly. "Maybe frightened people finally start telling the truth." Reed's expression tightened instantly. Across the cafeteria, Madison Blake slowly lowered her live-stream phone. But it was already too late. Her video had spread everywhere. Students around the room were staring at their own screens in disbelief, as clips from the incident flooded social media platforms. Number Westbridge High was trending nationally. So was Ethan Walker's face. Madison whispered under her breath, "Oh my God." For the first time all day, she looked genuinely scared. Near the cafeteria windows, Naomi Carter stood silently beside her father while federal officers secured the exits. Commander Marcus Carter still hadn't raised his voice once. That somehow made his presence even more terrifying. Ethan tried swallowing the panic building in his throat. "This is insane," he muttered. "They can't do this over some cafeteria fight." But deep down, he already knew this wasn't about the cafeteria anymore. One FBI agent approached Naomi directly. "Miss Carter, we'll need to speak with you privately." Several students immediately exchanged confused looks. Privately? Why, her Naomi simply nodded. No surprise. No hesitation. Like she had expected every second of this. Ethan noticed that too. And suddenly, the memory of her words came rushing back into his head. "You should have stopped 3 minutes ago." A cold feeling crawled down his spine. Meanwhile, upstairs, chaos erupted inside the school's security office. Officer Raymond Torres stood frozen beside the camera monitors as two federal agents began copying surveillance footage directly from the school servers. Every cafeteria feed from the last 6 months. One agent ordered. Torres blinked nervously. Six months, you heard me." Another agent unplugged a hard drive from the system while reviewing timestamps from earlier that afternoon. Camera angles showed everything clearly now, Ethan blocking Naomi's path. Madison live streaming. The tray hitting the floor. Every second. Every witness. Every teacher who looked away. Downstairs, Principal Reed rushed through the hallway toward the administrative offices while wiping sweat from his forehead. The moment he was out of sight, his calm expression vanished completely. He pulled out his phone immediately. No answer. He whispered angrily after dialing twice. Then he entered his office, locked the door, and hurried toward his desktop computer. His hands shook violently as he opened the school database. Security footage, disciplinary reports, archived complaints. Too many records, too many names. Reed began deleting files as quickly as possible. Years of buried incidents. racial complaints, student assaults, parent reports. Gone. Or at least he hoped so. But before he could finish, his office door suddenly opened behind him. Reed nearly jumped out of his chair. An FBI agent stood there watching him silently. "What exactly are you deleting?" Principal Reed's face drained of color. I was just organizing files." The agent stepped closer to the screen. Step away from the computer. Back inside the cafeteria. Students had stopped pretending this was entertainment. Some looked terrified. Others looked guilty. Teachers avoided eye contact with federal officers entirely. Madison sat at a table clutching her phone with trembling hands, while reading the live stream comments spiraling out of control. "She's done. That school's getting sued. FBI doesn't show up for bullying." Then one comment appeared repeatedly, "This is about something bigger." Madison slowly looked up toward Naomi. For the first time, she wondered if they had targeted the wrong person entirely. At the far side of the cafeteria, Ethan suddenly exploded. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, slamming his fist against a table. "She's the one causing all this." Several students flinched. One FBI agent immediately turned toward him. "Sit down. You can't treat us like criminals." The agent's stare hardened. "That depends." Ethan opened his mouth again. But none of his friends backed him up this time. Not one. That terrified him more than the FBI. Minutes later, Naomi was escorted into a private conference room near the administration offices. Commander Carter remained outside, while federal agents questioned her alone. Inside the room, Naomi sat calmly across from two investigators. One of them opened a thick folder. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "we need to confirm something before this escalates further." Naomi met his eyes steadily. Too late. She seemed to think. It already had. Back in the security office upstairs, another breakthrough happened. One FBI technician suddenly froze while reviewing hidden archived footage. "Agent Miller," he called quietly, "you need to see this." The screen displayed multiple flagged recordings from previous months. Different students, different incidents. Some Cafeteria, same group of students. And every single case had been marked internally as resolved, despite clear evidence of abuse. Agent Miller's expression darkened instantly. "So it's true," he murmured. "What is?" Torres asked nervously. The agent looked directly at him. "Westbridge High has been under federal investigation for months." Torres felt his stomach drop. The cafeteria wasn't just being monitored today. It had already been under surveillance long before Naomi arrived. Everything that happened to her had been recorded by the federal government in real time. Then suddenly, shouting erupted downstairs. Students rushed toward the hallway windows as two federal officers dragged a screaming IT administrator through the building in handcuffs. "I didn't do anything," the man yelled desperately. "Principal Reed told me to erase the files." The entire school erupted into panic. Teachers stared in horror. Students began recording again despite warnings. And standing near the cafeteria entrance, Ethan Walker accidentally overheard two FBI agents speaking quietly beside him. "Financial transfers connected to Walker Industries." Ethan froze. One agent continued flipping through a case file. "If the father's involved too, this thing goes way beyond the school." Walker Industries, his father's company. Suddenly, Ethan could no longer feel his hands. By sunset, Westbridge High no longer looked like a prestigious private school. It looked like a crime scene. News vans lined the streets outside campus. Parents crowded behind police tape demanding answers while reporters shouted questions at anyone leaving the building. Videos from Madison Blake's live stream had already spread across every major social media platform in the country. Millions of people had watched Ethan Walker humiliate Naomi Carter in the cafeteria. But that was no longer the story dominating headlines. Federal investigation. Corruption. Cover-ups. Missing reports. Hidden complaints. The deeper investigators dug into Westbridge, the uglier everything became. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker walked into his own house feeling afraid of his father. The Walker estate sat behind iron gates on the northern side of the city, massive and spotless, like something from a political magazine cover. Normally, Ethan loved the feeling of entering that house. Power lived there. Money lived there. Rules bent there. Tonight, it felt suffocating. The moment he stepped inside, he found his father already waiting in the living room. Richard Walker stood beside the fireplace in a tailored black suit, holding a glass of whiskey, while muted news coverage played across the television behind him. Westbridge High investigation expands. Ethan's face appeared briefly on screen. Richard changed the channel immediately. "You embarrassed this family today," he said coldly. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes. The FBI is investigating the school. And that's exactly why you should have kept your mouth shut." Ethan froze. That answer wasn't normal. It wasn't angry. It sounded prepared. Slowly, Ethan stepped closer. "What does that mean?" Richard said nothing. That silence told Ethan everything. A sick feeling twisted in his stomach as pieces finally started connecting together: the donations, the special treatment at school, Principal Reed protecting him for years no matter what happened. "You knew," Ethan whispered. His father's expression hardened immediately. "Watch your tone. You knew about all of this." Richard walked toward the bar counter calmly. "Westbridge survives because people like me keep it alive." Ethan shook his head slowly. No. This isn't just donations." Still no answer. Then Ethan saw it, a folder partially exposed beneath several financial documents on the desk near the window. Westbridge Internal Incident Reports. His heartbeat accelerated instantly. Before Richard could react, Ethan grabbed the folder and opened it. Student complaints, racial harassment cases, assault allegations, parent lawsuits quietly dismissed, and beside many of them, paid resolution approved. Signed by Principal Howard Reed. Funded through Walker Educational Foundation. Ethan's face went pale. "You paid them off." Richard stepped forward sharply. "Give me the folder." "You buried everything." "I said give it back." "You protected monsters." The slap hit Ethan so hard, his head snapped sideways. The room went completely silent. For several seconds, Ethan just stared at his father in shock. Richard lowered his hand slowly, breathing heavily now. "You don't understand how this world works." Ethan backed away. "No," he whispered. "I finally do." Across town, inside a dim conference room at the Federal Operations Center, Naomi Carter sat across from two FBI agents while Commander Marcus Carter stood near the window in silence. A projector illuminated the wall with dozens of files connected to Westbridge High. Financial records, archived investigations, surveillance timelines, and student photographs. Naomi looked at them without emotion. One of the agents closed a folder carefully. "Your transfer into Westbridge was approved 6 months ago." Marcus finally spoke. "Because we knew the school wouldn't expose itself unless someone forced it to." The agent nodded slowly. "Your daughter was never sent there as a normal student." Meanwhile, back at Westbridge, Madison Blake sat alone inside her bedroom, staring at her collapsing social media accounts. Hours ago, she had been gaining followers by the thousands. Now she was being destroyed online. Racist, bully, criminal. Brands were already cutting ties with her influencer page. Students from other schools reposted her live stream with disgust. And worst of all, people were praising Naomi. Madison's hands trembled as she refreshed her messages again. Then a new notification appeared. Unknown sender. Attached video file. New text. Madison hesitated before pressing play. The footage was old and grainy, recorded nearly a decade earlier inside a school hallway. A younger Principal Reed appeared on screen arguing with a woman Naomi immediately recognized. Her mother. The camera audio crackled badly. But several words were painfully clear. They assaulted my daughter. You people always exaggerate. My family deserves justice. Then another voice entered the recording. Richard Walker. Younger. Colder. More dangerous. This disappears tonight, he said flatly. The video suddenly cut to police lights outside a rainy intersection, a crushed car, shattered glass. Then a newspaper headline filled the screen. Local woman killed in late-night collision. Madison stopped breathing. At that exact moment, Ethan was reviewing the same footage alone in his bedroom upstairs. His hands shook violently while replaying the audio again and again. Richard Walker's voice. Naomi's mother. Threats. Money. Silence. Then the crash. Ethan slowly lowered the laptop screen. Horror spreading across his face as memories flooded back. His father forcing him years ago to stay away from certain conversations. Certain names. Certain news stories. This wasn't just corruption anymore. This was something far darker. Downstairs. Richard Walker was already on the phone. No, he said quietly into the receiver. The Carter girl was supposed to stay quiet. A long pause followed. Then Richard's expression changed for the first time all night. Fear. Real fear. Upstairs? Ethan backed away from the laptop like it had become radioactive. Because finally, after hours of confusion and panic, he understood the truth Naomi had known from the beginning. She hadn't come to Westbridge High to survive it. She had come to destroy the people responsible for ruining her family. And worst of all, his father was one of them. By the next morning, the collapse of Westbridge High had become national entertainment. Every major news network was replaying the cafeteria footage on a loop. Naomi standing calmly beside the spilled food. Ethan Walker smirking seconds before the military convoy arrived. Madison Blake, live streaming the humiliation, while thousands watched in real time. Then Commander Marcus Carter entering the cafeteria like a storm wrapped in silence. The internet had already chosen its villains, and Westbridge was burning alive because of it. Outside the school gates, satellite news trucks crowded the streets bumper to bumper, while reporters shouted over each other trying to deliver breaking updates. Parents screamed at school officials behind barricades. Protesters held signs demanding arrests and federal oversight. Helicopters circled overhead again, not military this time, but media. Inside the school gymnasium, emergency faculty meetings had dissolved into chaos. Teachers argued across the bleachers, while administrators panicked over lawsuits and suspension notices. The baseball championship banners hanging above the court suddenly looked pathetic, like relics from a dying empire. The season is officially suspended, the athletic director announced weakly. Students erupted instantly. What, you're punishing everyone? This is insane. But the shouting only grew louder when another administrator stepped forward, holding a stack of printed emails. 3 universities had already withdrawn scholarship consideration for Ethan Walker overnight. More were expected by afternoon. At the center of the gym, Ethan sat frozen while whispers spread around him like poison. He lost Stanford. No way. His life's over. For the first time since middle school, nobody looked at Ethan with admiration anymore. They looked at him like a disaster. Even his teammates had started sitting farther away from him. On B1, quietly, cowardly, exactly the way people abandon sinking ships. Across town, Madison Blake was experiencing her own destruction in real time. Her bedroom curtains stayed closed, while dozens of unread messages flooded her phone every minute. Death threats, exposed private photos, canceled sponsorship contracts, former friends publicly condemning her online to protect themselves. Her follower count dropped by the thousands every hour. Madison kept replaying the live stream clip of herself laughing, while Naomi stood silently in the cafeteria. At the time, it felt powerful. Now it made her feel sick. Then another notification appeared. Trending number, Justice for Naomi Madison, threw the phone across the room. Meanwhile, inside the Westbridge administration building, Principal Howard Reed was doing everything possible to save himself. It was student misconduct. He insisted aggressively during a closed-door meeting with investigators. Teenagers escalate situations all the time. An FBI agent stared at him without emotion. You deleted records. Reed immediately changed tactics. I was under pressure from parents. Wealthy parents. The students involved have influence. So now you're blaming children. I'm explaining the environment. But the truth was obvious now. Howard Reed wasn't trying to protect the school anymore. He was trying to protect himself. In another conference room across campus, Naomi sat calmly beneath the glare of television cameras and federal officials while reporters waited outside for statements. Commander Marcus Carter stood near the wall behind her, silent as always. One investigator slid a folder toward Naomi. Once this goes public, there's no turning back. Naomi looked at the folder without hesitation. There never was. The room fell silent, because everyone there finally understood something terrifying. Naomi Carter had planned for this moment long before she ever walked into the cafeteria. Later that afternoon, the federal press conference began outside the school gates. Reporters surged forward. The second FBI officials approached the podium. Questions exploded immediately. Is Westbridge under criminal investigation? Were school officials involved in racial discrimination? How deep does the corruption go? Flashbulbs lit up non-stop across the crowd. Then Naomi stepped forward unexpectedly. The noise disappeared almost instantly. Millions of viewers across the country watched live as she stood before microphones, wearing the same calm expression she had carried since her first moment inside Westbridge High. A reporter shouted, "Did you expect this to happen when you transferred there?" Naomi paused, then answered quietly, "I didn't come here to survive this school." Complete silence spread through the crowd. Naomi's eyes hardened slightly. "I came here to expose it." The sentence detonated across every news channel in America within minutes. Inside his house, Ethan watched the clip replay over and over from the living room television, while his father paced nearby, making frantic phone calls. "She knew," Ethan whispered. Richard Walker ignored him. "No," Ethan said louder, staring at the screen in horror. "She knew from the beginning." Richard suddenly snapped. "Enough." Ethan stood up slowly. "People are getting arrested because of you. Because of weak people." Richard corrected coldly. That answer finally broke something inside Ethan. He looked at his father differently now. Not like a powerful businessman. Like a stranger. Back at Westbridge High, the final collapse arrived before sunset. Students crowded the hallways as dozens of FBI agents entered the campus, carrying evidence boxes and federal warrants. Classroom doors opened one after another while computers, files, and hard drives were confiscated publicly. Teachers stood frozen. Nobody even pretended the school could recover anymore. Then shouting erupted near the administration offices. Everyone turned. Principal Howard Reed was being escorted down the hallway by two federal agents while desperately trying to pull free. "You can't do this," he yelled. I cooperated. Students flooded both sides of the corridor instantly. Phones raised high as the principal's face twisted with panic. An agent forced Reed's hands behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the hallway. For years, Howard Reed had ruled Westbridge High like a king protected by money, influence, and silence. Now hundreds of students watched him being dragged through his own school like a criminal. And standing near the far end of the hallway, Naomi Carter watched silently while Principal Reed's terrified eyes finally met hers. But the most horrifying part for Reed wasn't the FBI. It was realizing Naomi never looked surprised by any of this, like she had seen the ending long before everyone else. And somewhere behind the crowd, Ethan Walker stood completely motionless as the last illusion of his world collapsed around him. Westbridge High reopened 3 days later, under federal supervision. But the school no longer resembled the place students once worshipped. The banners were still hanging. The trophy cases were still polished. But the illusion was dead. Every hallway felt divided now. Students whispered in corners. Friend groups shattered overnight. Teachers avoided eye contact with one another as FBI agents continued moving through classrooms, carrying evidence boxes past terrified students. Security guards stood at every entrance. News vans remained parked outside campus like permanent scars. Nobody talked about football anymore. Nobody cared about popularity anymore. At Westbridge High, survival had replaced status. And at the center of the collapse stood Ethan Walker. The moment he entered school that morning, conversations stopped around him. Not out of respect this time, but disgust. Students pulled out their phones immediately. Some recorded openly. Others whispered loud enough for him to hear. "That's him. Look at his face. His dad paid the school off." Ethan kept walking, jaw tight, pretending not to notice. But for the first time in his life, nobody moved out of his way. Not even the freshmen. At his locker, he found red markers smeared across the metal door. Harassed. Next to it, murderer's son. Ethan stared at the words silently, while students gathered nearby pretending not to watch him. His hands curled into fists. Then he heard laughter behind him. Not supportive laughter. Cruel laughter. The kind he used to enjoy hearing when other people became targets. Now it followed him instead. Across campus, Naomi Carter walked through the hallway, surrounded by complete silence, not fear, but respect. Students moved aside without being asked. Some nodded at her quietly. Others looked ashamed when she passed. The videos had changed everything. More importantly, the truth had changed everything. For years, students at Westbridge had accepted bullying because powerful people controlled the narrative. But once the school started collapsing publicly, people began speaking. And they didn't stop. Anonymous posts flooded social media overnight. Former students described racist harassment covered up by administrators. Parents shared screenshots of ignored complaints. Videos from previous years resurfaced online, showing Ethan and his friends humiliating other students in hallways. Locker rooms. Cafeterias. The deeper people dug, the uglier Westbridge became. Near the center courtyard, several students had even started wearing blue ribbons, the same color Naomi wore on her first day at school. A silent statement. Against racism. Against silence. Against Westbridge itself. Inside the cafeteria, Madison Blake sat alone for the first time since freshman year. Nobody invited her to their table anymore. Nobody asked for selfies. Nobody laughed at her jokes. Her influencer career was collapsing so fast she could barely process it. Every hour brought new hate messages and leaked clips from her old live streams. Former friends publicly condemned her online to protect their own reputations. Then she saw Ethan enter the cafeteria. And suddenly, Madison made a decision. If the school was burning down, she wasn't going down alone. That afternoon, a new video appeared online. Private footage, never posted before. The clip showed Ethan inside a locker room weeks earlier, mocking another black student, while Madison laughed nervously behind the camera. But this time, Madison edited herself almost completely out of the video. Only Ethan remained clearly visible. The caption read, "He did this for years." Within an hour, the video had millions of views. Ethan discovered it while sitting alone in the baseball dugout staring at his phone. His breathing turned uneven immediately. "She set me up," he whispered. But deep down, he knew Madison wasn't lying. That was the worst part. Across campus, more students started coming forward publicly. One sophomore described being shoved into lockers by Ethan's teammates. A former cheerleader admitted Principal Reed ignored repeated racial slurs directed at minority students. Even teachers anonymously leaked stories about administrative cover-ups. The fear protecting Westbridge for years was disappearing. And once fear disappeared, people talked. Meanwhile, Naomi sat quietly inside the library, reviewing documents beside two federal investigators. News clips played silently across nearby television screens. Naomi Carter becomes symbol of national school reform. The title made her uncomfortable. She never wanted fame. She wanted truth. One investigator looked toward her carefully. "You understand what you've become to people now?" Naomi closed the file in front of her slowly. A reminder of what that silence protects the wrong people. Outside the library windows, students gathered around posters demanding justice and policy reform. Some carried signs supporting Naomi. Others demanded criminal charges against the Walker family. Westbridge High had transformed into a battlefield between truth and self-preservation. And nobody knew where the destruction would stop. Later that afternoon, Ethan wandered through nearly empty hallways while students avoided him like contamination. His own teammates refused to answer texts. College recruiters stopped returning calls. Teachers who once protected him barely acknowledged his existence anymore. For the first time in his life, Ethan Walker was alone. Then something unexpected happened. A voice behind him said quietly, "You finally know how it feels." Ethan turned sharply. Danielle, the same student who tried defending Naomi in the cafeteria. Ethan looked away immediately, ashamed without understanding why. But before he could answer, another voice echoed from farther down the hallway. An older voice. Familiar. Naomi Carter. Everyone nearby turned. At the far end of the corridor stood a woman holding a worn leather folder against her chest. Late 40s. Nervous eyes. Trembling hands. The moment Naomi saw her, her expression changed for the first time since arriving at Westbridge. Shock. Real shock. One FBI agent nearby immediately recognized the woman and stepped forward. "You weren't supposed to come here yet." But the woman ignored him completely. Her eyes stayed locked on Naomi. Then she spoke words that made the entire hallway fall silent. "I was there the night your mother died." Ethan Walker stopped sleeping after the woman appeared at Westbridge High. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same things repeating over and over again, the cafeteria floor covered in spilled food. Naomi standing perfectly calm while everyone laughed at her. His father's voice inside the old video saying, "This disappears tonight." And finally the image of Naomi's mother standing beside a wrecked car beneath flashing police lights. The worst part wasn't fear anymore. It was guilt. Real guilt. For the first time in his life, Ethan began questioning everything he had been taught about power. Growing up as Richard Walker's son meant learning one rule above all others: control the narrative before the truth controls you. At Westbridge High, Ethan had lived like a king because the system was built to protect people like him. Teachers defended him. Coaches excused him. Students feared him, and he had mistaken fear for respect. Now the illusion was gone. Late that night, Ethan sat alone inside his father's private office while rain hammered against the mansion windows. Richard Walker was away meeting attorneys downtown. Leaving the house unusually silent, Ethan stared at the locked cabinets lining the walls for several seconds before finally forcing one open with a bronze letter opener from the desk. Folders spilled everywhere. Financial records, confidential agreements, settlement payments, and hidden beneath them student files. Dozens of them, mostly black students, some Hispanic, a few Asian. Nearly every file included harassment complaints, disciplinary disputes, or violent incidents buried by the school board. Attached payment records showed donations from the Walker Foundation arriving shortly after each case disappeared internally. Ethan's breathing became uneven as he flipped through the documents faster. One file described a sophomore athlete who lost his scholarship after accusing Ethan's teammates of racial abuse. Another detailed a female student who transferred schools after repeated threats in the locker rooms. Every report ended the same way. Case closed, insuffisamment évidence. No disciplinary action required. Ethan slowly backed away from the desk. This can't be real. But it was. And deep down, he realized something even worse. His father hadn't hidden these things from him because Ethan was innocent. He hid them because Ethan had become part of the system itself. Downstairs, the front door suddenly slammed shut. Richard Walker was home. Ethan quickly grabbed several files before hearing footsteps approaching the office hallway. He barely had time to hide the documents beneath his jacket before the office door opened violently. Richard froze instantly when he saw the broken cabinet lock. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Richard's expression darkened. "What did you take?" Ethan swallowed hard. "How many people did you destroy?" Richard closed the office door carefully behind him. "That's not your concern. They were kids. They were problems." The answer hit Ethan harder than any punch ever could. Richard stepped closer calmly. "You think this country rewards weakness? Those families wanted money. Attention. Victimhood. We protected the school." "No," Ethan whispered. "You protected yourself." For the first time in years, genuine anger flashed across Richard Walker's face. "You have no idea what it took to build this family." Ethan's voice shook now. "Did Naomi's mother deserve to die too?" Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. And in that silence, Ethan got his answer. Richard's eyes hardened immediately. "Be very careful what you accuse me of." Ethan stumbled backward in horror. "Oh my God." Richard pointed toward him coldly. "Everything you have exists because of me. Your future. Your name. Your life. Don't throw it away because you suddenly developed a conscience." But Ethan was barely listening anymore. Because for the first time in his life, he understood what Naomi must have felt walking through Westbridge High, surrounded by people who protected cruelty simply because cruelty benefited them. And suddenly, the cafeteria incident no longer felt like a joke gone too far. It felt unforgivable. The next afternoon, Ethan drove back to Westbridge alone. The campus looked nothing like it once had. Protest signs covered the front lawn. News crews still lingered outside the gates. Federal investigators moved through hallways while students whispered nervously every time Ethan passed. Nobody greeted him anymore. Nobody admired him anymore. By the time he reached the library courtyard, his chest felt tight enough to collapse. Naomi sat alone near the fountain, reviewing documents beneath a gray sky. Students nearby lowered their voices immediately when Ethan approached. Some even pulled out phones. Everyone expected another confrontation. Ethan stopped several feet away from her. Naomi didn't look surprised. "You knew I'd come," he said quietly. She closed the folder in her lap. Eventually, for a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The weight of everything pressed down on him at once, the humiliation, the lies, the corruption, the realization that his father may have helped destroy Naomi's family years earlier. Finally, his voice cracked. "I didn't know." Naomi studied him silently. "My father," Ethan struggled to continue. "He buried everything. The complaints, the racism, all of it." Still no response. Ethan's eyes lowered toward the ground. "I thought people respected me because I mattered." "You mattered," Naomi said calmly. Ethan looked up. "You just never understood what you were becoming." The words hurt because they were true. For the first time since childhood, Ethan felt completely stripped of excuses. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Naomi's expression remained unreadable. Sorry for what? The question shattered him. Because there wasn't only one answer. Sorry for the cafeteria. Sorry for the years of bullying. Sorry for laughing. Sorry for benefiting from a corrupt system. Sorry for becoming exactly like his father. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Smaller somehow. "I don't know how to fix any of this." Naomi stared at him for several long seconds while cold wind moved through the empty courtyard. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag. Ethan frowned slightly as she pulled out a small black USB drive. No label. No markings. She held it out toward him. Ethan hesitated before taking it carefully. "What is this?" Naomi's eyes never left his. "The truth your father is still hiding." A chill ran through Ethan instantly. "What's on it?" Naomi stood up slowly, enough to destroy everyone involved. Then she walked past him toward the administration building, leaving Ethan alone beside the fountain, holding the USB drive with trembling hands, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker realized he was no longer afraid of losing his reputation. He was afraid of learning how much blood his family's empire was built on. The USB drive changed everything. Ethan Walker understood that the moment he plugged it into his laptop and watched the hidden files unfold, one after another like buried bodies rising from the ground. Every folder exposed another layer of corruption tied to Westbridge High secret payments, deleted complaints, falsified disciplinary records, surveillance footage, and private board meetings where powerful adults discussed minority students like disposable problems instead of human beings. The deeper Ethan searched, the harder it became to breathe. His father's name appeared everywhere. Walker Foundation transfers, confidential settlement approvals, private communications with Principal Reed, threats disguised as legal warnings. For years, Richard Walker hadn't simply protected Westbridge. He had controlled it. And now the entire empire was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. Outside Ethan's bedroom, reporters crowded the gates of the Walker estate while news helicopters circled overhead through the stormy evening sky. Television anchors across the country continued discussing the cafeteria incident that started it all. But now nobody cared about a spilled lunch tray anymore. America wanted the truth, and Ethan was holding it in his hands. One final folder remained unopened. Archive Carter Family. Ethan hesitated before clicking it. The screen filled with recovered security footage from 8 years earlier. Naomi's mother stood inside the Westbridge administrative office, arguing with Principal Reed while hidden audio crackled beneath the video. She was assaulted because of her race. Naomi's mother demanded. "And your school buried it." Reed looked terrified even back then. Then Richard Walker entered the room. Younger, sharper, colder. "This conversation ends tonight," he said calmly. The footage skipped forward. Rain. Parking lot lights. Naomi's mother leaving the building alone. Another camera angle showed a black SUV pulling out behind her car minutes later. Ethan froze. Then the screen went black. The next file contained only audio. Tires screeching violently. A horn. Impact. Glass shattering. And finally silence. Ethan slammed the laptop shut and stumbled backward from the desk like he had touched fire. No. His chest tightened violently. Everything Naomi believed about his father was true. Maybe worse. The following afternoon, Westbridge High prepared for the largest confrontation in the school's history. Federal officials announced an emergency public assembly inside the auditorium after news leaked that major evidence connected to the investigation would be released live. Students flooded campus carrying phones, cameras, and live stream equipment, while police barricades surrounded the school entrances outside. The entire country was watching now. Inside the packed auditorium, tension hung like smoke in the air. Students whispered nervously, while reporters filled the back rows preparing national broadcasts. FBI agents guarded every exit. Teachers stood along the walls, avoiding eye contact with one another. Nobody knew exactly what would happen, but everyone understood Westbridge High would never recover after today. Near the front row, Naomi Carter sat calmly beside Commander Marcus Carter while television lights reflected across the stage. Her expression remained unreadable despite the chaos surrounding her. Across the room, Madison Blake watched Ethan enter the auditorium carrying his backpack, and immediately panic flooded her face. She knew the USB was inside. Madison's entire future depended on surviving this investigation. Her sponsors were gone. Her followers hated her. Former friends publicly blamed her for everything. If the full archive became public, she would be remembered forever as one of the faces of Westbridge corruption. And Madison refused to drown alone. As students settled into their seats, she slipped quietly behind the stage curtains and pulled out her phone. He brought the files. She whispered urgently. A voice answered through speakerphone. Then stop him. Back inside the auditorium, an FBI official approached the podium while cameras went live nationwide. The room fell silent. Over the past several months, the agent began. Federal investigators uncovered extensive evidence of racial discrimination, institutionnelle corruption, witness intimidation, and unlawful suppression of student complaints connected to Westbridge High School. Gasps spread through the audience. Projector screens illuminated behind the stage. Hidden documents appeared one after another. Settlement records, deleted complaints, expulsion threats, emails between administrators and donors discussing how to protect the school's image. Students recognized names immediately. Kids who vanished from school suddenly. Scholarships revoked without explanation. Victims, nobody defended. The auditorium grew louder with every file. Oh my God. They knew. My brother tried reporting this. They ruined people's lives. Then the hidden videos started playing. Richard Walker speaking privately with school officials. Principal Reed ordering records erased. Board members agreeing to bury racist incidents before media exposure. Teachers in the audience looked horrified. Some students started crying. Others recorded everything, while live stream numbers climbed into the millions nationwide. At the center of the chaos, Ethan sat frozen while his father's voice echoed across the auditorium, speakers like poison finally escaping into daylight. Then the Carter family files appeared. The room became completely silent. Naomi's mother filled the screen again, her voice shaking, demanding justice, refusing money, refusing silence, and finally the audio recording of the crash played through the auditorium. By the end, nobody was whispering anymore. People looked sick. A girl near the back row covered her mouth and started sobbing quietly. Even students who once supported Ethan looked horrified now. And that was when Madison moved. She rushed toward Ethan through the crowded aisle, while everyone stared at the projector screen. Give me the drive, she hissed desperately. Ethan pulled the backpack away instantly. What are you doing? You don't understand. Madison grabbed at the zipper violently. If more leaks come out, we're finished. We should be. Madison's eyes widened with panic. You think they'll forgive you after this? They shouldn't. The answer stunned her for half a second. Then she lunged for the backpack again. The struggle knocked chairs sideways. Students screamed. Every camera in the auditorium swung toward them instantly. Stop, Ethan shouted. But Madison had completely lost control now. You ruined all of us, she screamed. You should have destroyed the USB. The entire confrontation streamed live across the country. Millions watched in real time as FBI agents rushed down the aisles toward them. Madison grabbed the bag one final time, but Ethan yanked it away just before federal officers restrained her. Let me go! She screamed hysterically while cameras flashed everywhere around her. Then suddenly the auditorium doors opened, and the entire room turned. Richard Walker stood there surrounded by attorneys and private security. For one brief moment, absolute silence swallowed the auditorium. Father and son stared at each other across the crowd. Ethan no longer saw power when he looked at his father. Only destruction. Richard's expression hardened immediately when he noticed the projector screen behind the stage. The leaked files, the videos, the evidence. He understood instantly. And for the first time in years, Richard Walker looked afraid. FBI agents moved toward him immediately. Richard Walker. One announced loudly, You are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, financial corruption, and multiple federal civil rights violations. The auditorium exploded. Reporters surged forward. Students stood on chairs recording. Teachers stared in disbelief as federal agents forced Richard's hands behind his back. You have no idea what you're doing. Richard snapped furiously. But nobody listened anymore. Not even Ethan. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the auditorium like the final crack in a collapsing empire. And suddenly, after days of anger, fear, lies, and public humiliation, Ethan broke completely. He sank slowly into his seat, while tears streamed uncontrollably down his face in front of the entire school. Not because his father had been arrested, but because he finally understood how many innocent people had suffered while he stood there laughing beside the people responsible. Westbridge High became unrecognizable after the arrests. The school that once worshipped power now moved carefully through silence. The trophy banners still hung above the hallways, but nobody looked at them anymore. The football field sat empty beneath gray skies. The baseball season was gone. Principal Reed was awaiting federal trial. Richard Walker's empire had collapsed across every national headline in America. And for the first time in decades, students at Westbridge actually looked at one another when they passed in the halls. Not with arrogance. Not with fear. With awareness. The cafeteria reopened 2 weeks later. Nobody wanted to be there. That room had become something larger than a lunchroom now. It was the place where the lies finally cracked open. The place where millions of people watched cruelty become exposure in real time. The place where silence stopped protecting the powerful. Students entered quietly that morning, carrying trays, while whispers moved carefully through the room. No loud tables. No cruel laughter. No phones shoved into people's faces for entertainment. Even teachers seemed different now. Watching students more closely. Stepping in the moment, voices rose too high. At the center of the cafeteria stood a temporary stage and microphone prepared for the school assembly. Rows of chairs faced forward. Every seat filled within minutes. News cameras waited outside the building again. Though this time they were not there for scandal. They were there because Westbridge High had become the center of a national conversation about racism. Institutionnel silence. and the damage caused by people who choose comfort over courage. Near the back wall, Ethan Walker stood alone. Nobody stood beside him anymore. But unlike before, he no longer seemed angry about it. He looked exhausted. Weeks earlier, Ethan had walked through this cafeteria, believing he owned it. Now he barely recognized the person he used to be. The investigation had destroyed his future, his reputation, his family name, and almost every friendship he thought was real. But the worst punishment wasn't public humiliation. It was memory. Remembering the laughter, remembering the fear in other students' faces, remembering Naomi standing in silence while he tried to break her in front of everyone, and understanding too late that she was never weak. He was. At exactly noon, the cafeteria doors opened. Naomi Carter entered quietly. The entire room fell silent immediately. No whispers, no laughter, only silence. She wore the same calm expression she carried on her first day at Westbridge. But now the atmosphere around her had changed completely. Students moved aside instinctively as she walked toward the front stage. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others looked like they wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Behind Naomi walked Commander Marcus Carter, followed by several federal officials and new members of the school oversight board. Westbridge would never belong to the same people again. Naomi stepped onto the stage slowly while cameras flashed outside the cafeteria windows. For several long seconds, she simply looked across the room. At the students, at the teachers, at the cafeteria floor where her tray once shattered while people laughed. The memory still lived in that room whether anyone admitted it or not. Then Principal Reynolds, the interim replacement brought in after Reed's arrest, approached the microphone first. What happened at Westbridge High, he said carefully, was not caused by one incident. It was caused by years of silence, fear, corruption, and the normalization of cruelty. Nobody moved. Today is not about repairing a reputation. Reynolds continued. It is about finally telling the truth. He stepped away from the microphone. Then Naomi walked forward. The silence somehow deepened. Even the air felt heavy. Naomi looked across the cafeteria again before finally speaking. When I first came to Westbridge, she said quietly, people asked why I stayed calm. Her voice was soft, controlled, but every single person heard it clearly. They thought I wasn't afraid. She paused briefly. But I was. Students exchanged glances immediately, because that answer felt more honest than anything they expected. Naomi continued. I was afraid every time someone laughed while pretending not to notice what was happening. I was afraid when teachers looked away. I was afraid when students stayed silent because they thought protecting themselves mattered more than protecting each other. Nobody looked comfortable anymore. Several students lowered their heads. A teacher near the back quietly wiped tears from her face. Naomi's eyes moved slowly across the room. The worst people weren't the bullies. Complete silence. It was the people who watched. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could, because almost everyone in the cafeteria suddenly realized she was talking to them. Not just Ethan. Not just Madison. Everyone. The students who laughed nervously. The teachers who ignored warning signs. The friends who stayed quiet to avoid becoming targets themselves. Westbridge had not been built by monsters alone. It had been built by spectators. Naomi looked down briefly before continuing. My mother tried to expose this school years ago. She believed people would do the right thing if they finally saw the truth. Her voice tightened slightly for the first time. She was wrong. The room stayed frozen. But maybe, Naomi said softly, we don't have to stay wrong forever. Somewhere near the middle rows, a student slowly stood up. Daniel, the same student who tried defending Naomi on the first day. His voice shook slightly. I should have done more. The room turned toward him. Another student stood beside him, then another. One girl began crying openly while speaking toward Naomi. I laughed because I didn't want them targeting me next. A football player near the back admitted quietly. We all knew what Ethan's group was doing. One confession after another spread across the cafeteria like a dam finally breaking. Not excuses. Admissions. Truth. And standing near the back wall, Ethan Walker felt every word hit him harder than the last. Finally, after several long minutes, he stepped forward himself. The room immediately became silent again. Ethan looked pale, smaller somehow, not because he lost status. Because guilt had stripped away the arrogance that once protected him, he stopped several feet away from Naomi. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, finally, I spent years thinking power meant never feeling ashamed. He said quietly. Nobody interrupted. Ethan's eyes lowered toward the cafeteria floor. I thought hurting people made me important because everyone laughed when I did it. His voice cracked slightly, but they were laughing because they were afraid. Several students looked away immediately. Ethan turned toward Naomi fully now. I can't undo what I did to you. The silence became unbearable, but I'll regret it for the rest of my life. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge High, Naomi looked directly into Ethan's eyes without anger, only sadness, and somehow that hurt him even more. No applause followed. No dramatic forgiveness, because some damage doesn't disappear neatly. Some truths stay heavy forever. A few minutes later, the assembly ended quietly. Students left the cafeteria slower than usual, speaking in hushed voices, while teachers remained behind, helping remove chairs from the floor. Naomi picked up her bag near the stage and walked toward the cafeteria exit one final time, the exact same path she walked weeks earlier when people laughed at her humiliation. Only now nobody laughed. Nobody even spoke. Students stepped aside silently as she passed. Ethan remained standing near the back wall watching her leave while regret settled deeper into his expression with every step she took away from him. Naomi paused briefly at the cafeteria doors, not turning around, not smiling, just breathing in the silence that finally replaced cruelty. Then she walked out of Westbridge High forever, and nobody dared break the silence she left behind. Because everyone there understood the truth now. 3 minutes was all it took to destroy lies built over decades. Westbridge High thought silence would protect them forever. They thought money could bury the truth. Popularity could erase cruelty. And laughter could make humiliation look harmless. But in the end, it only took one girl refusing to break for an entire system to collapse in front of the whole country. Naomi didn't just expose the bullies, she exposed every person who watched, stayed silent, and allowed it to continue. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable truth of all. So now I want to ask you something. If you had been inside that cafeteria that day, would you have stood up for Naomi? Or would you have stayed silent like everyone else? If this story hit you emotionally, don't forget to like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about justice, racism, betrayal, and revenge that expose the darkest sides of human behavior. And before you go, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one.